What if the biggest danger facing the Browns quarterback every Sunday isn't the defense lining up across from him, but the teammates standing right next to him? Because over the past few weeks, something unsettling has started to surface on film, and once fans spotted it, there was no going back. What looked like routine protection breakdowns suddenly felt calculated, deliberate, and far darker than anyone expected. It started quietly, just a few clips making the rounds online. Nothing flashy, no headline-grabbing mistakes. But when you slow the tape down frame by frame, a disturbing pattern begins to emerge. Defenders streaming in untouched, clean lanes opening on the blind side, a quarterback getting crushed before plays can even develop, and the same player standing there every single time. Now the conversation has shifted. This isn't about bad coaching or missed assignments anymore. It's about trust, because when protection fails this consistently and the effort looks questionable at best, people start asking questions no team wants asked. And once those questions catch fire, there's no controlling where this story goes next. At first, nobody thought this would turn into anything more than another frustrating stretch of football. The Cleveland Browns were struggling up front, the offense looked choppy, and most fans chalked it up to the usual suspects: new faces on the line, growing pains, communication issues that would get cleaned up with time. That's how these stories usually go. When Shedeur Sanders started taking hit after hit, the explanations came fast. He was holding the ball too long. The scheme wasn't helping him. Defenses had figured out the protection. Nothing alarming, nothing unusual, just football being football. And for a while, that explanation worked. But then came a stretch of games where the pressure wasn't just frequent, it was instant. Not creative blitzes, not disguised looks, just defenders walking through the same gap again and again, completely untouched. The kind of pressure that kills drives before they ever begin. That's when fans stopped blaming the playbook and started rewinding the tape. The turning point for a lot of people came during the matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. What initially looked like another rough outing quickly turned into something else once clips began circulating online. Slow-motion breakdowns, screenshot threads, frame-by-frame analysis from fans who couldn't understand how these breakdowns kept happening the same way every week. As more eyes locked onto the footage, one name kept popping up: Cam Robinson. Suddenly, the narrative shifted overnight. This wasn't just about losing reps or getting beat by elite defenders anymore. What people thought they were seeing didn't line up with simple mistakes, and once that realization set in, the story took a much darker turn. Once fans started slowing the footage down, everything changed. These weren't chaotic plays where protection just collapsed under pressure. They were clean, structured snaps where something felt off. You could pause the screen right after the ball was snapped and already see it. The pocket wasn't forming, it was opening. And the openings weren't random. Clip after clip showed defenders getting a straight, unobstructed path to Shedeur Sanders. No chip, no resistance, sometimes not even a hand placed on the rusher. On several snaps, the left side didn't just lose, it disengaged. Viewers pointed out moments where the blocker's body was turned away entirely, shoulders facing inside, while the edge rusher flew past untouched. At first, people tried to give it the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was a misread, maybe help was supposed to come from the inside, but that explanation fell apart fast. Offensive line fundamentals don't just disappear on accident, especially not at this level. Analysts began highlighting how the footwork didn't match the assignment, how the angles taken made no sense, and how the release timing felt unnatural. What really set social media on fire was the consistency. Not one bad rep, not two, the same kind of breakdown showing up week after week against different teams, different fronts, different personnel. That's when fans stopped calling it poor technique and started calling it something else. Phrases like ghost blocking and open door protection flooded timelines as people compared screenshots like evidence in a case file. Former players joined the conversation, careful with their words but clearly uneasy. Several pointed out that these weren't the kinds of errors you expect from a veteran lineman. This wasn't panic, it wasn't getting outmatched, it looked intentional, or at the very least, completely indifferent.
And when that idea took hold, the footage stopped being just bad tape. It became a question mark hanging over the entire offense. Because once you accept that these plays might not be accidents, a much bigger problem comes into focus. And the more games fans went back and re-watched, the harder it became to explain what was happening as anything other than a pattern that no one was addressing. That's when the tone around this story shifted. This stopped being about one bad game or a rough matchup. People began asking a different question. How many times does something have to happen the exact same way before it's no longer a coincidence?
Bad linemen get beat. That happens every Sunday. But what raised eyebrows here was how these plays unfolded. The losses weren't explosive. There was no fight back into the rep, no attempt to recover. On several snaps, the engagement was brief, almost symbolic, before the defender was waved through like it was part of the design. And that's the moment fans started using a word no one throws around lightly: sabotage. To be clear, no one was claiming hard proof, but rumors started circulating, and reports online suggested that former players were looking at the tape and shaking their heads. It's been said that these weren't mistakes you make from being overwhelmed. They were mistakes that came from not fully committing to the assignment. That distinction matters because effort shows up on film just as clearly as failure. What made it even more alarming was the repetition across opponents. Different defensive schemes, different rushers, same outcome. The left side collapsing before Shedeur Sanders could even set his feet. Analysts who had spent years breaking down line play pointed out how the posture, hand placement, and footwork were consistently wrong in the same ways. That doesn't usually happen by accident. And then there was the body language. After the play was blown up, while other linemen reacted with frustration or urgency, one figure kept popping up on screen standing upright, calm, almost detached. No argument, no visible anger, just a slow jog back to the huddle. Fans noticed it. Analysts noticed it. And once you notice that kind of indifference, it changes how you see every snap. That's why the word sabotage didn't come from nowhere. It grew out of patterns, pauses in a growing pile of clips that all told the same uncomfortable story. Whether it was intentional or just someone mentally checked out, the damage looked the same. And the longer it went unaddressed, the louder that whisper became. As the clips kept spreading, attention naturally turned to the man at the center of them. And what Cam Robinson did next only poured gasoline on the fire, or more accurately, what he didn't do. There was no strong denial, no visible frustration at the accusations. In short locker room interviews, he leaned on the safest explanations possible. Communication issues, misunderstandings, things that would supposedly get cleaned up on tape. The words were calm, almost rehearsed, but the tone didn't match the moment. When a player is being accused, even indirectly, of putting his quarterback in danger, you expect some edge, some urgency. Instead, what fans saw felt detached. That detachment became its own storyline. On the field, after blown protections and brutal hits, Robinson's body language barely changed. No animated reactions, no visible arguments with teammates, no sense of "this can't happen again." He'd stand up, glance around, and jog back to the huddle like nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. For a position that lives on aggression and accountability, that calm stood out in the worst way. Former players were careful not to go too far, but even they hinted at how unusual it looked. Offensive linemen pride themselves on protecting the quarterback. When that fails, the reaction is usually immediate and emotional. But here, the reaction felt absent. And absence, in moments like this, speaks louder than words. Fans weren't just reacting to missed blocks anymore. They were reacting to the silence, because silence suggests comfort, and comfort suggests someone who either doesn't see the problem or doesn't feel the need to address it. Neither explanation sat well as the hits on Shedeur Sanders kept piling up. And while Robinson stayed quiet, the quarterback on the receiving end of those hits was starting to show cracks in his composure. Not with outbursts, not with blame, but with something far more telling. Subtle frustration, sharper comments, a tone that suggested patience was running thin. Because when protection fails and no one takes responsibility, silence stops being neutral. It starts becoming part of the problem. The numbers tell part of the story. Sack totals climbing, pressures arriving earlier and earlier, plays breaking down before routes could even develop. But the film shows something deeper. Sanders started drifting in clean pockets, escaping when he didn't need to, cutting plays short out of self-preservation. Those aren't rookie mistakes. That's a quarterback adapting to chaos. And the hits kept coming. Blindside shots, drive-killing pressures, bodies at his feet almost immediately after the snap. When a quarterback knows he won't have time, everything changes. The throws get rushed, the decisions get sharper, but also more conservative. Confidence doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes, snap by snap. In post-game pressers, Sanders didn't explode, he didn't name names, but his words got tighter, less diplomatic. He talked about accountability, about communication, about everyone doing their job. The tone wasn't emotional, it was controlled, and that control made it more telling, because frustration filtered through restraint is usually the last step before things spill over. The body language told the rest. After sacks, he'd look toward the left side of the line, not angrily, not shocked, just that blank, disappointed stare, like someone who already knows what went wrong and isn't surprised anymore. On the sidelines, he spent more time with the tablet, less time with teammates, processing, adjusting, protecting himself. At this point, Sanders wasn't just fighting defensive fronts, he was fighting doubt. Doubt that the pocket would hold, doubt that the hit he didn't see coming wouldn't be the next one. And for a young quarterback trying to establish himself, that's dangerous territory, because once trust and protection is gone, it doesn't reset easily. And while Sanders absorbed the punishment quietly, others in the locker room were starting to feel it too. Veterans noticed, coaches noticed, the tension was no longer just on film, it was in the air. And soon, the comments coming from around him would make it clear that this wasn't just a quarterback problem anymore. That tension finally started to leak out through the veterans, not in blow-ups, not in accusations, but in carefully chosen words that carried far more weight than they seemed on the surface. When longtime Browns lineman Joel Bitonio was asked about the protection issues, his answer sounded calm, even supportive, but the subtext landed hard. He backed the coaching staff like veterans usually do. He talked about trust, about preparation, but then he pivoted. Players have to take responsibility. We have to protect our guy. That line hit differently. In NFL locker rooms, nothing is said by accident. When a leader with Bitonio's resume emphasizes accountability, it's usually because he feels it's missing somewhere. He didn't point fingers, he didn't mention names, but he didn't need to. Everyone watching the tape knew who those comments were orbiting. The message wasn't subtle. This wasn't a scheme issue anymore. This wasn't a talent mismatch. This was about effort, execution, and doing the one job offensive linemen are paid to do. Other veterans echoed the same energy in quieter ways. Phrases like, "We've got to clean some things up immediately," and "Guys can't be taking hits they don't need to take," started popping up in interviews. It all sounded diplomatic on the surface, but together it painted a picture of a locker room that was no longer comfortable brushing this off. What made it even more telling was what wasn't said. No one rushed to publicly defend the left side. No one jumped in to shut down the noise. That kind of silence among teammates is rare, especially when criticism gets this loud. In most cases, players circle the wagons. Here, they let the questions hang. For veterans who've seen coaching changes, rebuilds, and losing seasons, this kind of dysfunction stands out because protection isn't optional, it's foundational. And when that foundation cracks, it threatens everything: the offense, the quarterback, the locker room itself. And as those veteran voices grew firmer, attention shifted to the people with the power to actually stop this. Because at some point, accountability doesn't come from comments, it comes from decisions. And that's where the spotlight burned even hotter. At that point, the spotlight shifted upstairs, because when a problem shows up on film this clearly, week after week, it stops being just a player issue, it becomes a coaching one. And that's where Kevin Stefanski found himself under growing scrutiny. Fans weren't asking for miracles, they were asking for basic adjustments.
extra help on the left side, a rotation, a benching, something that signaled awareness. But instead, the responses stayed the same. We trust our guys. We'll look at the tape. We believe in the process. Safe words, familiar words. And with every repetition, those words started sounding less like leadership and more like deflection.
What made it harder to ignore was the lack of visible change. No personnel shakeup, no schematic overhaul to keep Shedeur Sanders upright. The same weak point remained exposed, as if everyone was watching the same problem unfold, but waiting for someone else to solve it. That kind of inaction doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's a choice. Online, speculation started to grow. Some fans wondered if loyalty was getting in the way. Others floated the idea of internal politics, contracts, or fear of setting a precedent. To be clear, there's no proof of any of that. But when silence stretches this long in the face of mounting evidence, people were gonna fill in the gaps on their own. And that's where the accusations turn darker. Because ignoring a problem is one thing, allowing it to continue when it directly puts your quarterback in harm's way is another. Whether Stefanski saw the issue as fixable or simply misjudged its severity, the end result looked the same on Sundays. Sanders kept getting hit. The tape kept getting worse. At some point, fans stopped asking why the protection was failing and started asking a more uncomfortable question. If this many people can see it, why won't the coaching staff act? And once that question takes hold, the coach isn't just managing a roster anymore, he's managing a crisis of trust. Because when leadership refuses to intervene, it sends a message, not just to the fans, but to the locker room. And as this situation dragged on, that message started to feel louder than any press conference response. The longer it went unanswered, the more it looked like mismanagement at best and complicity at worst. For a lot of people, there was one play that erased any remaining benefit of the doubt. One snap that didn't need context, explanation, or expert breakdown. You didn't have to know scheme. You didn't have to understand protections. You just had to watch. The ball was snapped. Cam Robinson lined up on the left, and then nothing. His feet barely moved. The edge rusher exploded off the line and ran straight past him, untouched, like Robinson wasn't even there. No punch, no recovery, no late shove, just a clean path to the quarterback. Shedeur Sanders never had a chance. He was hit almost instantly, driven to the turf before the play could even begin. And what happened next is what made the clip go nuclear. As Sanders lay there for a moment, Robinson turned back toward the huddle. No glance, no hand offered, no urgency. He simply jogged away. That clip exploded. Millions of views in hours. Screenshots froze Robinson mid-play. His body turned the wrong direction while Sanders was being crushed behind him. Former players reacted publicly, choosing their words carefully but clearly disturbed. Some laughed it off at first, then stopped laughing altogether when they replayed it again. Fans did what the team hadn't. They slowed it down, drew circles, compared it to earlier games, and the similarities were impossible to ignore. The same posture, the same lack of engagement, the same result. Pressure, sack, broken drive, all from the same spot. What pushed this clip over the edge was how simple it was. No disguise, no stunt, no confusion. Just one man failing to block the defender directly in front of him. That's why the debate shifted overnight. This wasn't about interpretation anymore. This was about efforts you could see with your own eyes. From that moment on, the tone changed. Even people who had defended Robinson stopped speaking up. The conversation moved from, "Is this real?" to, "How is this still allowed?" Because once a single snap becomes that clear, the excuses dry up. And after that play, this story stopped being controversial. It became unavoidable. Once it reached that point, the conversation stopped being about film and started being about consequences. Because even if you remove intent from the equation, even if you assume the best-case scenario, the outcome doesn't change. Shedeur Sanders is still getting hit, still rushing throws, still playing like someone who doesn't feel safe in his own pocket. That's not sustainable for any quarterback, let alone one the organization is trying to build around. Trust is the foundation of quarterback play. Trust that protection will hold long enough for routes to develop. Trust that the blind side is secure. Once that trust cracks,
It changes everything: mechanics, decision-making, confidence. And those changes don't just vanish when the film session ends. Inside the locker room, this kind of situation creates quiet fractures. Linemen start overcompensating, skill players rush routes, communication tightens, and the quarterback carries the weight of every mistake, even the ones that aren't his. It only takes one player mentally checking out to throw the entire unit into survival mode.
The long-term damage is the real threat, not just sacks or lost drives, but the message it sends. If obvious problems go unaddressed, players start wondering what accountability actually means. If the quarterback isn't protected when everyone can see he needs it, what does that say about priorities? Those doubts spread faster than any rumor. Sanders' comments began reflecting that tension. He stopped softening his words. He made it clear he wasn't willing to keep absorbing punishment indefinitely. Not emotional, not dramatic, just honest. A quarterback drawing a line before the situation draws it for him. And that's why this can't continue, because the issue is bigger than one lineman, one coach, or one bad stretch of games. It's about preserving the future of the offense. It's about preventing a young quarterback from developing bad habits out of fear. And it's about stopping a problem that's already visible to everyone watching. If nothing changes, the question won't be whether this hurt the Browns in the standings. It'll be whether it permanently damaged the trust between the quarterback and the people meant to protect him. And once that trust is gone, getting it back is almost impossible. So now we're left with the question no one inside the building seems willing to answer out loud. Why is this still happening? Why is Cam Robinson still on the field when the evidence has been stacking up for weeks? And why is Shedeur Sanders still getting blindsided while the explanations never seem to change? The tape exists. Fans have watched it. Analysts have slowed it down. Former players have hinted at it. This isn't hidden in advanced metrics or buried in scheme talk. It's right there in plain sight. And when something is this visible, silence stops being neutral. It becomes an answer in itself. That's what makes this situation so uncomfortable. Either the problem is being underestimated or it's being tolerated, and neither option inspires confidence, because when a team allows its quarterback to take unnecessary punishment while avoiding decisive action, it sends a message far beyond one game. It tells the locker room what matters and what doesn't. For Kevin Stefanski, this moment may define more than a single season. Leadership isn't about saying the right thing at the podium. It's about stepping in when something clearly isn't working. And right now, the refusal to act is becoming louder than any press conference quote. As for Sanders, you can only ask a quarterback to endure so much. Trust doesn't erode all at once. It fades through moments exactly like these. One hit, one missed block, one unanswered question at a time. And once that trust is gone, no amount of "we'll look at the tape" is going to fix it. So the real question isn't whether fans are overreacting, it's how much longer this can go on before something finally breaks: a lineup change, a locker room confrontation, or a quarterback who decides he's done putting his body on the line without protection. Because if the team won't say it, the people watching already have. And until something changes, this story isn't going away. It's only getting louder.